You're listening to Nakedly Examined Music, a podcast about songs and songwriters. My name is Mark Lintonmeyer. My guest for episode 221 is David Nagler, who started in the 90s with a band that was eventually called Nova Social, who released 3 albums and several EPs up through 2014. David was also a member of Wesley Stace, aka John Wesley Harding's band, is the musical director for his Cabinet of Wonders variety show. As Nova Social wrapped up, David recorded his first solo album in 2013. In 2016, recorded Carl Sandburg's Chicago Poems, where he set Carl Sandburg poems to music with various guests. You're right now hearing Theme in Yellow, featuring Wilco's Jeff Tweedy. After that, David quickly recorded 2 more albums, The Appointees and Songs of Advice and Adversity. And today we're going to be talking about his new project, As for the Future, who's released its self-titled album. We'll talk about the song Koan for the Music Business. Then we'll look back to that Songs of Advice and Adversity EP and talk about See the Devil. Then back to Drunk at the Prom from the final Nova Social full album For Any Inconvenience from 2011. And close by listening to Encyclopedia of Songs, also from the new album As for the Future. For more information, you can see davidnagler.com or look As for the Future up on Bandcamp or Facebook. For more about this podcast, see nakedlyexaminedmusic.com or support the effort and get my notes documents and a fully ad-free experience by going to patreon.com/nakedlyexaminedmusic. I will play a little bit of Theme in Yellow featuring Jeff Tweedy from Carl Sandburg's Chicago Poems from 2016. We're going to get pretty quickly to the new thing. After the Nova Social, several albums, what is the shape of your career?
Well, Nova Social was, I would say, my first proper band. We were called Stretch. We started in the mid-90s, and we made an EP called Don't Settle for Walking, which you can find streaming in other places under the name Stretch. But I'm not a huge fan of it, so I don't talk about it a lot. But when we changed our name to Nova Social, and our first record came out, The Jefferson Fracture, that's when I'm sort of like, okay, we're making the records that we wanted to make. So for the bulk of Nova Social's sort of period, the group is kind of inactive now, though, which would have been like 99 through 2014. Mostly it was just me and my partner, Tom Soriano, and then a variety of other musicians, drummers and keyboard players and singers and string players and all this stuff. But mainly it was kind of Steely Dan-ish, 2-headed monster kind of group. That was basically my main project for many, many years in terms of writing and really in terms of playing as well. I would say the one individual who I played with throughout that period was the songwriter Chris Mills, who is like a good, dear friend of mine. We went to college together and we go way, way, way back. And it was through him that I met John Langford and Wesley Stace, 2 of the people who I started collaborating with in the mid-2000s. John Langford came up to me at a show, and both of them had heard the record that Chris and I made called the Wall to Wall Sessions. And John came up to me and said, I've got a project, a Welsh men's choir. And he said, I want you to wrangle the choir. And I was like, sure. So we started working with a Welsh men's choir up in Toronto, and that became like our sort of main project, though I've worked with him on other things over the years. And then with Wes, we met in 2001 through Chris. And in 2009, he started doing the Cabinet of Wonders show. And he said, I need a musical director for this, someone who can play guitar and keyboard. And would you be interested? And I said, okay. And Wes and I have been working together pretty consistently ever since then. That was sort of my main period of like working with other people on stuff. But Nova Social became like a kind of electro pop disco group, which is great because Tom and I were just really into that. And I still love the music that we made and all the music that inspired it.
So you both were playing guitar on the early records and then you both shifted to keyboards, basically? Is that?
I was playing guitar,
okay,
a little bit of like keyboard, but I was really like a guitar rock guy ever since I was in junior high, basically. Even though I started playing piano first and keyboard, so I would still play piano from time to time. Tom was the bass player in Nova Social. And then somewhere after we kind of were like, well, we're going to go in this other direction, he was like, I want to play more guitar, like kind of Nile Rodgers-ish guitar. And I was like, I just want to sing and be like a front person, and do the disco string arrangements and play a little bit of synthesizer. And so that was kind of how that group swapped roles a bit. But I was still writing songs, and I was writing songs that I guess would be considered singer-songwriter songs, for lack of a better term. And I ended up making a record with Josh Kaufman called Mortal Enemies. We made that in 2013. And I didn't put it out for a long time. I didn't put it out until a couple of years ago, really, because I loved it so much and I wanted to see a proper release. But then it was 10 years on and I was like, well, I should probably put this out. We made that record. And sometime around that time, I realized that the centenary of the Carl Sandburg Chicago Poems collection coming out was coming up in, I guess, 3 years in 2016. And so that gave me this deadline of finishing the Chicago Poems record. This was an idea I had in the late 90s. And I started working on it in like 2008, maybe. I started writing some of the songs and then did a little bit more work on it. And then finally, when I realized that I had this deadline, I like really got to work on it and basically finished it with a variety of friends and did the whole thing and had it ready for release by October of 2016. But at that time, Nova Social was not really happening. And so I guess I was sort of looking for more solo endeavors. And so I did the Carl Sandburg project and then immediately after the election of 2016, went into working on the appointees, volumes 1 and 2, songs about Trump cabinet appointees. And everything just kind of took a bit of a shift just because that was how things worked out.
Seems like you're multitasking, that you're working on solo stuff, you're still doing the Cabinet of Wonders thing and participating in Wesley Stace's backup band, like when he tours?
A bit. I mean, he's doing mostly solo shows these days or duo stuff. He just toured with Loudon Wainwright a bit. But when we came out with Late Style, we did a handful of like kind of late style band shows. But of course, the English UK, which is the band that performs at the Cabinet of Wonders, is also kind of a functional band as well that he can utilize if he's doing East Coast shows or something like that.
Well, certainly you made the transition from here's my partner's singer-songwriter sort of stuff to I'm going to set other people's words. I'm going to let other people sing my words. When I had Wesley Stace on the show, I was pretty astounded by that particular collaboration, that it wasn't just usually it's the Bernie Taupin, Elton John, somebody writes lyrics and somebody creates the music, but him writing the lyrics with the rhythms already determined, and then you creating songs around them and giving them back to him to actually sing. I've never heard of that particular configuration.
That's not entirely accurate. I'll just say that is that basically he did give me the lyrics and I set them to music. It was pretty straightforward. What we did do, though, is we discussed what we wanted the record to be like, some of the touchstones of the music. One of the things that I really loved about our collaboration on that record, and the next one too, that we've already started recording and we're going to continue recording in the fall, is that he doesn't really give me specific ideas for like the song should be in this style for the most part. It's kind of like I read the lyric and I think, okay, what style fits this? What works for this song? And some of it works with prior touchstones that he's given me. But some of it is also just because we've been friends and been playing together for many, many years. We know what each other likes, basically, and what we're drawn to. So to give you just a quick example of that, like Do Nothing If You Can, the song off of Late Style, we never mentioned Teddy Pendergrass, but it was something that we knew. We talked about Teddy Pendergrass many times over the years. And so I immediately was like, oh, it'd be really cool to take like a Love TKO kind of element and write a song in that style. And so that was how that happened.
All right. So the reason that we're here today, the As for the Future album, it seems like even more distance from your starting point, that you've already worked in this style, and some of the stuff on Late Style, is very continuous with this, bringing the Brazilian elements, but actually, no, I'm going to create this sort of alter ego, this band name. Yeah. Can you just explain where you're at with this in the creativity and the marketing in terms of putting it out this way before we hear the song?
I've been a fan of Brazilian music for many years, like 25, 30 years, but it was probably within the last 10 or 15 that I really started diving really deep into it and became like, a massive fan of a variety of Brazilian artists. Not too much of a variety. A lot of them are from the 60s and 70s and some 80s, but the 70s is probably what I would say is the main focus of the artists I've been drawn to. I've been influenced by that, and it's come through in certain songs. So like there's a song called Bobby's Insecurities on Mortal Enemies, which I think was written in kind of like a Tropicalia vein. And there's two songs on The Appointees, one called The Non-Believers and one called Mechanical Bull. And those are both kind of very Brazilian influenced songs. And it was actually, among other things, my friend Dave Derby, who I've played music with before, who said that those two songs reminded him of like Tropicalia music from the late 60s because the lyrics were politically bent. They had like a political thing to them. But of course, the music was very kind of light and groovy and airy and stuff. And in a way, that was kind of like a motivating factor in wanting to start the As for the Future project. Was like, if I were to write songs that were Brazilian influenced, what would they sound like? It was kind of like something that I sort of worked on and thought about for a long time. And then finally in 2018, I wrote a number of them. And I had a partner at the time, Brian Cantor, drummer, and talked to him about like what we might do with these and where it might lead. And so that was kind of the start of it, was just amassing enough songs that I felt comfortable with. But I'm a huge fan of that style. And so like when Wes and I were making Late Style and I was writing the songs for that, he might have said like, oh, we should throw in some bossa nova. And so like Everything All the Time and All the U's were both obviously Brazilian influence. But As for the Future was very much about like, what are the songs that could be Brazilian influence that we could record and put out there and would not feel like it was just a genre exercise. I think that's been sort of the main concern of mine for years. An artist like Arto Lindsay, the records he made in the mid 90s to the early 2000s, they're just amazing. They're amazing English language, Brazilian influenced records. And so I'm like, I have no business doing stuff like that because Arto Lindsay's already made these amazing records. And so it took me like years to get over that and basically feel like, okay, I found a way in basically that makes sense to me.
All right, let's play the song at last. Koan for the Music Business, the first single off there. Do you have a few words to say about it before we hear it in full?
Not a ton. I mean, the way I introduce it when we play it live is basically it's a Zen Buddhist song about the music industry.
If a record drops in a forest, does anyone hear it? If a record drops in a forest, is there a hit song? If a record drops in a forest, can anyone cut it down? If a record drops in a forest, does anyone sing along? If you're walking in the forest on any given Friday, can you see the records dropping like acorns on the ground? Do you hear a needle drop, or is it more like a pin drop? Can you hear a hot new single, or is it the same old sound? If a record drops in a forest, does anyone hear it? Are the animals and birds in the wild your only fans? Is the whoosh of the wind and the babbling brook the equivalent of the universe clapping its hands? If a record drops in a forest, does anyone hear it? If a record drops in a forest, does the artist have to fall? If a record drops in a forest, is it part of nature's playlist? If a record drops in a forest, does it make a sound at all? If a record drops in a forest, does anyone hear it? Apart from a few band campers listening for free, are there any royalties earned if anyone sings around a campfire? Is the Music Modernization Act posted on a tree? And if a record drops in a forest, does anyone hear it? If a record drops in a forest, is there still a hit song? If a record drops in a forest, is there anyone to cut it down? And if a record drops in a forest, does anyone sing along?
Yeah, so just the fact that you're taking your singer-songwriter thing and you're gluing it on this bass as opposed to, I don't know, writing lyrics in Portuguese, or I don't know exactly what the alternative is in styling it up. But this does seem like a different thing. As much as I liked David Byrne's Ray Momo album when it came out, it sort of got criticism at the time of, it seemed like a scholastic exercise. Oh, look, I just discovered, here's a bossa nova, and here, let's teach everybody the difference between a tango and a bossa nova, and we'll go through these different things. And so it doesn't seem like the most, authentic work that he has ever put out, for instance.
Right. That's a tricky one. I was a huge Talking Heads. I mean, this would have been I would have been in high school when that record came out. And I was a pretty big Talking Heads fan. But at the same time, Naked came out. And again, there's a bit of like all these different sort of world musics being thrown into that. And then he starts his Luaka Bop label, and he's releasing the Brazil Classic series. And at the time, I guess I probably had mixed feelings about it. I may even still have mixed feelings about it now. But when I think back about it, I'm like, wow, there was a real kind of love of this music and excitement about it. And so he was just like, he had the resources and the audience at the time. And he was just like, I'm just going to dive in. And so that's what he did. And he made these records, that I've revisited a bit, and they're fun and they're good.
Yeah, I guess it's a different thing. I generally look at exploration of styles from a sort of White Album perspective of like, let's write just this song. Okay, let's do a thing with this song that we've never done before, as opposed to let's make the leap and do a whole album or a whole project that's in this spirit. Was the Wesley Stace thing him asking you to do like, I want a whole record in that style the first time that you'd made that leap to a whole record? Because the other ones seem a little more eclectic, that we got still got some guitar rock, we still got some syntho, we still, etc.
For Late Style, it wasn't just one thing. It was but it was like a feel. He said like late 70s kind of jazzy, groovy stuff, early 70s stuff, bossa nova. Like he just mentioned a few reference points. And then there were other things that I kind of maybe threw that weren't necessarily what he had mentioned, but it was just about the feel. And I want to say, As for the Future is kind of similar. It's not all sunshine and roses, and that is very intentional. But the music, it's a lightness to it. And I would say like I was writing late style songs around the time I was finishing up maybe a lot of the As for the Future songs. And both of those have like a lightness to them in terms of their sort of sound. But Wes and I both come from the school where you can put lyrics on it that don't necessarily feel the same way as the music right away. There can be some darkness involved.
Right. So you've got dry humor in the lyrics, and whether intended or not, if you have trombone and flute leading with a very, elevator music style, like that has been used again and again in film for comedic effect. Like that is what people think now, not like they don't remember firsthand. At least people were not very young, and we were not around in 1978 listening to I don't know. I was, or 68 is more what I was thinking of. The sort of Mad Men thing is almost what I'm getting out of some of this. Is the lightness, is it, if you ask They Might Be Giants, like, are you doing novelty songs? Is humor? Like, they just won't even answer that question. Like, you don't get it if you have to answer that question. It's not Weird Al. It's just, this is the ironic, absurdist way that life is. And so if I'm going to use gestures like this.
Totally. Part of it comes from, and I think Wes and I both have had this, it's like listening to a lot of the music in this style with, unironically and taking it kind of very seriously. I've listened to music like, let's just say, I got into Frank Sinatra when I was in high school. And then and later after that, I got into like the arrangements. And so I was into like Nelson Riddle's arrangements, and like, listening to Nelson Riddle's arrangements after like, in the rock world doesn't necessarily feel like it's like, oh, this is old person music or something like that. And basically, like, I think I got into listening to soundtracks and jazz and easy listening and all sorts of, expanding the genres that I was into involves taking the music like kind of seriously, basically, in a way. And at the same time, maybe realizing or acknowledging that not everyone takes it that seriously. I think I had that realization recently when I was watching the first season of Severance. So there's a part, where like one of the characters is like walking through the hallway and you hear like the sort of light bossa nova playing. And I'm like, oh my God, that's like my music. But the way it's intended is it's supposed to so
dystopian.
Well, yeah. And so in that way, I guess it's kind of appropriate. But it's supposed to give this like chill vibe that is, claustrophobic in its way. And I'm like, oh, I guess some people may just listen to this music that way, but that's just the way it is.
The beauty of irony is that it's ambiguous, that you pretend to be something and that's what you become. And so it's just a way into, at least for people over a certain age, I feel like making fun of something and enjoying something are not mutually exclusive. And you find that your so-called guilty pleasures, like, okay, well, I don't need to be defensive about liking only cool music or something, so I will listen to John Denver or whatever. Let's get a little specific about once you get down to crafting in this style. So you have your percussionist, who I see is playing 6 different things according to the some of who Barcurinas. I don't even know what a pandero. I mean,
I forget what all the marks tell you, but I can say that pandero is that kind of like that Brazilian tambourine that you hear in a lot of sambas and things. So that one is a very particular sound.
The prato.
Yeah.
Is he doing this in multiple takes, or is he just standing with all these things in terms of establishing this initial bed?
So this recording, most of the songs on the record were done during, like, in the heart of pandemic. So we would have done Koan for the music business would have been started in, I want to say, July of 2020. And so the way we would have done it is I would have recorded a nylon string guitar and vocal track, just as like a scratch to a click, sent the track over to Brian Cantor, who would have done a drum track, would have sent it back to me. Then I would have sent it on to David Lismy to add bass. And then probably maybe at the same time or different, or one before the other, I would have sent it to Ryan Keberly to add trombone. And I would have sent it to Mauro Rafuscu to add percussion. And so what Mauro would have done is he would have added all these things basically and just put it all on.
So you don't even necessarily know. I mean, I guess you saw the number of tracks that he produced, but was it a stereo track, or is it, here's a bunch of things, fade them in and out as you like?
It's individual tracks. He would send individual tracks basically. And part of this is because I'm not an expert in making Brazilian music by any stretch. I just kind of went with it. I was like, whatever he wants, let's put it all in. So pretty much whatever he recorded, I want to say, is in the track. So
okay, so when the fact that for the flute riff after the first verse, this recurrent comes in and you have a shaker come in just during that, that was not a mixing thing. That was his choice, you're saying?
That was his choice, yeah.
And then in terms of working with the flute and trombones, are you writing out charts? Are you sending them a vocal version and saying, do hear what the melodies are? Or
that one line that happens in between the verses, that one was a line that I had written. And so Ryan probably would have played that first. And then Roberta, who played flute on that, would have added flute as well. Ryan also added these other trombone parts, these alternating lines that happen in the 4th verse and the 6th verse. Those were entirely his. He came up with them. Ryan is an astounding arranger, composer on his own right. And so he would have made those.
The artists have to fall. If a record drops in a forest, is it part of nature's playlist? If a record drops.
And so when Roberta would have added flute, I would have actually transcribed what he did and given her his parts, or maybe I wrote some harmonies for her parts. I don't remember, but he was the one that added that stuff that you hear during the 4th and the 6th verses of the song.
Okay. And then in terms of the little bit of electric piano that sort of serves as the one thing that cuts I mean, for the most part, this is the ensemble with you on nylon, right?
Right.
Holding things down throughout, indefinite amounts of percussion and trombones coming in and out. Why even get a separate person to come in and play electric piano as opposed to you just, I guess she plays with it a little more as the song goes on. But yeah, tell me about that decision.
Stephanie is someone that I'd played music with for a while. She did the Appointees show, and then she was part of the David Nagler and the Legislation band that did an EP that came out like the week of the pandemic sort of spread everywhere. But one of the things for me is, and I feel this way about certain songs on this record, which I ended up playing keyboard on, is I actually think it's better, for me personally, I think it's better that someone else do the other one. Like if I write a song on keyboard, I prefer someone else play guitar. And if I play guitar, I prefer someone else play keyboard, because I end up, this is just me, I end up basically playing what sounds like almost the same thing. And so I like having someone else do it because they come to it fresh and they just bring something entirely different to it than I would have.
Right. You have to perform some sort of mental gymnastics if you're going to be the one-man band, or even, as you're saying, just overdub yourself a few times to get in the mode of, I'm going to do the piano in this style, or, something to make it just not what immediately comes out, or else, as you said, it lacks the three-dimensionality. I mean, that's what's great about having other people.
They're just too similar. And like, there are songs when like I can write a song and I can write a string arrangement to go with it. And because it fills certain spots, but when you're just playing throughout these two instruments, I just end up accidentally doing the same thing.
Sure. Is that the same reason why you would not be your own bass player in most circumstances, or that you just didn't really spend time with the bass such that you would do that?
Well, I mean, that depends. I mean, mostly, I don't think I've ever played bass on a recording of mine that's been released, but particularly for As for the Future, I mean, David Lismy is an astounding bass player. And so it's really about what he brings to it, that makes it so special.
The big group vocals. So did you have like the choir come in for a day and sing on a bunch of songs? Is that?
Once again, this is a pandemic.
Oh, this is pandemic. So is that many more houses is going to just to, hey, add your voice to this 3 other people that I've already put on here?
That's basically it. The difference here between the instruments and the vocals is the instruments I didn't give a lot of direction for most of this stuff. I was like, basically like, you're all amazing. Do what feels right. Here are the chords, and if you need them, and here's the recording, and go for it. But the vocals are a little different in terms of, for each of those, I arranged each of the vocal parts, and the idea was to have like an equal number of male voices and female voices, or low voices and high voices. But there were parts for those, so it was basically like, here's what you sing in the 4th verse, here's what you sing in the 6th verse. And what I would do is I would send everyone a chart, and I would send them an MP3 demo with their vocal maybe in like one ear and the song in the other ear. And then I would also send them like the tracks. They could all do, for the most part, home recording. And so they just do the recordings themselves. And they had enough to know what their parts were.
So you end up with a lot of tracks. Did this get sent off somewhere else for the mixing? Were you involved in the mixing?
So Daniel James Goodwin is the amazing engineer mixer who I've worked with on almost every record that I've made, all the Nova Social stuff and all the solo records, actually. And so to be technical, I work in Logic. Logic is my recording DAW as it goes, and Daniel works in Pro Tools. And so basically it was like I just assembled everything in Logic, and then I changed all the files to Pro Tools files. And I want to say, since this was the first session we did, I used a very old template of his that I had, set all the tracks up and uploaded it. And then he mixed it based on this Pro Tools session that I created for him to mix it.
Okay. So I've done something similar to this where you sort of are doing individual track mixes. It seems like this is not the kind of project where you're digitally lining up rhythms or something. You're just no, that's what the band did. It's fine. But especially all these vocals, there's a lot of room to be picky, let's say.
I'll say I wasn't not picky.
Okay.
Especially at the beginning, when you're laying the foundation for the track, it's really important to have, I think, and if you're not playing in a room together, because if you're in a room together, things are a little different. But if you're doing this remote recording, I think it's important to kind of get everything really tight at the beginning. And then things can get a little looser as more of it goes on top, especially like the percussion and the vocals as well.
This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. You are probably pretty busy. I now have 5 podcasts, plus I teach a class and have a part-time day job. With everything going on, it's easy to let your priorities slip and not engage in proper self-care. You might want to consider, as part of your non-negotiable self-care regimen, therapy. Talking things through with a professional can help you cope with everything coming at you, keep you from getting in your own way, get you out of counterproductive cycles. It empowers you to be the best version of yourself. Therapy is not just for people who have experienced major trauma. It is a thing that we should be making time for in a civilized society. So if you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. BetterHelp is entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, suited to your schedule. You just fill out a brief questionnaire and you'll get matched with a licensed therapist. If you don't like your therapist, you could switch at any time for no additional charge. So never skip therapy day with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/nakedly today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/nakedly. If you're a big fan of music and comedy like we are, then you need to check out this new podcast, Let Me Ask My Dad. Hosted by David Bryan, best known as the co-founder of Bon Jovi and as a Tony Award-winning composer behind Broadway smashes Memphis and Diana the Musical, alongside his comedian daughter Gabby Bryan. Let Me Ask My Dad is a cross-generation self-help podcast like none other. Each week, David and Gabby answer listener-submitted dilemmas on everything from how to handle disrespectful coworkers to what to do when you escape a cult, with amazing stories from the road and David's 40-year music career along the way. So a lot of the stuff we get into on this show, they might have things to say about how to deal with your bandmates' bullshit, touring etiquette. Go check them out. Catch new episodes of Let Me Ask My Dad every Tuesday, wherever you get your podcasts. All right, I don't think we have to say a lot about the lyrics. I think they're sort of self-explanatory. I found a lot of your lyrics are just, you sing very clearly. It's not just random images, like it's a definite story. And, so you ran with this metaphor. What is your state of despair about whether anybody will hear this record? I mean, is that the kind of thing? Because it's definitely, everybody, has to promote themselves and nobody's going to help you. And this is not going to get on the radio. Or, I mean, is that the kind of pessimism that you're going into this with?
I've been thinking about this. I've thought about it quite a bit in order to write this song. But I think a lot of it has to do with metrics. The idea that you can see everything now. You can see how many people have listened to this, how many people have watched this. And you can think about it. 20 years ago, it was just like, you just had no idea. You put it out there. You're like, well, maybe people are listening to it, maybe not, but you don't really know. And now it's almost like or at least you think you know. And so because of that, you can see this number and you can be like, okay, well, it's under 100 or like it's under 500. And then you think about it in relation to the amount of people there are in the world who listen to music and all these things. And because there are these, what seem to be really low numbers, it's depressing. As opposed to it being like, oh my God, looking at it as like a glass half full, like, oh my God, there are these people who have listened to it and enjoyed it.
All around the world that you would never get in a club. If you got a club, 50 people is great. And now you're reaching 500. That should be wonderful.
Right. But when you think about how many people there are and how many, when you, and you look at like the millions and billions of plays things get, you're like, wow, this is nothing. That's where that sentiment comes from. But it's funny to have that sentiment that, oh, woe is me kind of sentiment, but it's a real feeling. And I think other musicians feel it. And so I felt like it would be fun to write a kind of fun song about that feeling.
And you mentioned the Music Modernization Act. I mean, is the legislative atmosphere something that is contributing to this, or this is just something that goes along with the current climate?
That was probably being passed around the time that I wrote the lyric. And my feeling about that was, and I'm not sure that this is accurate, which is that our country was so polarized at the time. Obviously, we're super polarized now, but it was so polarized at the time that one of the things that could actually bring people together was the Music Modernization Act. It was a thing that Republicans and Democrats both got on board with. And Republicans and Democrats don't get on board about anything these days, but they got on board on this. And to me, that showed how small the stakes were, that it was a thing that was like kind of so insignificant to them that they could collaborate on this.
We take our wins where they come.
Right.
Well, let's get the second song out there. We can see a little darker. So See the Devil from David Nagler and the Legislation, Songs of Advice and Adversity, a 2020 EP. This is the closing track on it, the lengthiest track. It's got more atmospherics in it than we've heard before here. Can you say a little about it before we hear it?
Not really. I think it's lengthy and it's dark. And I think that's kind of all I need to say about it for now, I think.
If they want to see the devil, let them them see the devil. I'll be your mirror or your movie screen. If you want someone to blame, I am surely game, because the devil isn't the worst you've seen. If you want sympathy, travel back in time, before you could break the bank on someone else's dime. If you want peace of mind, try letting go before some naysayer says they told you so. Let them see the devil's eyes. Let them see the devil's horns. Let the devil make them smile. Let the devil keep them warm. If you want bad news, you know I can deliver straight to the mouths of babes from the jaws of hell, and making victims out of the selfish ones who'll claim their only crime is living well. Let them taste the devil's kiss. Let them hear the devil's laugh. Let them speak the devil's name. Get the devil's autograph, and let them have a guided tour of the devil's universe, and let their expectations go from bad to worse. If they want to see the devil, let them see the devil. I'll be your mirror or your movie screen. If you want someone to blame, I am surely game, because the devil isn't the worst you've seen.
All right, so we got a good, almost a full minute of soundscape before your piano chords come in. I assume that was a later addition, right? That this was just written as piano, or were you writing this as a linearly?
This is an EP. I'll go backwards with this one, which is that I had a show booked in March of 2020 at Union Hall in Brooklyn. Daniel Knox, a singer-songwriter from Chicago, who is just one of my favorites. I think he's wonderful. He was on the Carl Sandburg record. He's just fantastic. He wanted to come to New York and do a show. And so I set up a show, and this would have been like maybe November. And so I had this idea of like, I've got songs for an EP. I know the band I want to play them, which is the band that performed the Appointees record live. So it was Conrad Meisner on drums, Johnny Lamb on pedal steel, Stephanie Sanders on keyboards, and Annie Nero on bass. And so the idea was we would rehearse in November or December. We'd record the EP in January, have it mixed and mastered by February, and then out the day of the show on March. I think it might have been like 6th or 7th, 2020, something like that. But the studio that because we did most of the record live, like everyone tracked live. There are overdubs. I know Stephanie did some piano overdubs. I did guitar overdubs. Vocals were, at least the backing vocals were definitely overdubbed later. But most of it was done live. But the studio that we recorded at in Montclair didn't have a piano. And so I recorded the song on piano at a studio in Manhattan. I'll give you a little sort of sad and wonderful note about this, which is the studio that was recorded at is right where the producer Hal Wilner had his studio, who passed away because of COVID in maybe April 2020. But I got to see his studio. He wasn't there, but I took like a peek into his studio in December of 2019 when I went to record this piano. And so that's like a very beautiful memory I have of doing this piano track. But anyway, so I recorded the piano track, and that was what the band played over. So basically the band did the atmospheric thing live, kind of leading into it. And I can't remember if we like kind of cut and pasted or if they actually recorded it and just sort of led into the track. I actually don't remember. I can check though. I'm curious. So, but the piano track was going, and I want to say the band was playing, the piano track was playing, and I was just singing over it. So that was how we recorded the song in January of 2020 in the studio in Montclair, New Jersey.
You know, we really haven't talked about your vocal style. So Daniel Knox, who I was listening to, his guest spot on a lot of vibrato.
Yeah.
What are your vocal influences? What are you trying to do? I mean, it seems very, again, like I'm going to deliver these lyrics so you can understand every word. I'm not going to monkey around a lot with it, as opposed to your earlier stuff where you're a little more aggressive at the very least.
I don't know when, if ever, I will make a record like, I don't know, Future Days by Can, where the vocal is like an instrument, and you can't necessarily hear the lyrics, but it's like, there's drums and there's bass and there's keyboards and there's guitar, and then there's a vocal that kind of just another instrument among all of them. I've always been into lyrics and I've always been into having them be audible. And I listened to early, maybe Nova Social records, and I'm like, God, these lyrics are too audible. And so maybe that accounts for now going just a little lighter in my touch, not being quite as aggressive. But this song, I'll say the vocalist I had in mind was Justin Vivian Bond when I wrote this song. She was the one that I sort of imagined singing this song, because her shows often have, like a very dark thing, especially in the Kiki and Herb shows that she would do. There's a very dark performance to them. And so she was the voice that I think I had in mind when I wrote this song, basically.
I'm not familiar with her. I mean, I'm sort of picturing a Nico thing almost. Is that?
There's a Nico vibe to it for sure. And in fact, when I played this song at a series I was doing a few months before we recorded it, Tammy Faye Starlight, who I have been playing music with for many years, she did that song and she has a Nico show. So she was the obvious sort of choice to do it.
I guess the fact that I'll Be Your Mirror is actually in the song is maybe what made me think of that. Perhaps that's coincidence.
I forgot about that, but I'm going to say that was somewhat intentional.
After I just said, oh, your lyrics are so transparent, they tell us a consistent story. This one, I'm not completely sure. Obviously, the images, the individual images are vivid enough. They're not ambiguous, but who is the they? What is the song actually about?
I'll tell you where the quote came from. I made this record, The Appointees, Volumes 1 and 2, and those songs were written in the wake of the 2016 election. And it came from this idea of like, okay, everyone knows what Trump is like. Who are the people that will be his cabinet? Who are the people that are going to go along with him, support him, and everything. And so it became this writing project where I would sort of wake up in the morning and I would Google these people who reported to be in the cabinet and sort of, look into their history and news items about them and their Wikipedia pages and everything. And I would use that as a jumping off point for songwriting. So some of the songs on that record are a little vague. And others are very specific. They point to items in these people's lives and their history and everything. And I want to say that See the Devil was written in a similar way. It wasn't quite as on the nose as those songs were, but the genesis was a similar point. And this is exactly what it was. In February 2018, there was a New York Times article about the now deceased Russian mercenary chief, Yevgeny Prigozhin. I don't know if I got that right. And so I read this quote that was in the Times article. The Americans are very impressionable people. They see what they want to see. I have a lot of respect for them. I'm not upset at all that I ended up on this list. If they want to see the devil, let them see him. That last line was basically where the song kind of started from, was that one line. And that one line just resonated with me in a way about everything that was what was sort of happening at the time and still is.
All right. So the they is all of us, that it's a social commentary song, who defend our selfish ways as merely living well, as you say here. This could be a message that would be delivered with a jaunty wink, but no, this is a very cinematically straight ahead depressing. In listening to those songs about Trump appointees, I think that idea, I don't want to investigate Trump's psyche. That's not so interesting to me. But the idea, we're talking what the day that Vance was accepted as, and there's so many stories already about wasn't this a smart guy at some point? So there's an interesting tragic story about a lot of these people, not just that they're idiots that glommed onto somebody, but that they made some deal with the devil, essentially.
Yeah. When did never Trump turn into immediately Trump? Like that stuff, basically. Yeah.
That there's much more dramatic possibility in that. So yeah, what was your thought? Again, is the narrative from this is the guy who's been assassinated or who's on the list to be, is the bleakness about it, about the message or about who the messenger is, or why this mood with this message?
I'll say this. I mean, the way I often write songs, certainly working on Late Style has changed things a lot, and the Sandburg record, where, setting lyrics to music and often maybe coming up with original music right there. But the way I write a lot of songs is I have some lyrics and I have some music, and I try and kind of speed date the two and see what fits. And so I already had that, minor key piano progression. And then I realized I had that lyric. And so somewhere within a year and a half of having written those lyrics, I was able to sort of combine the two, and it seemed to suit it well. Sometimes I'm good with maybe the lyric and the music not necessarily connecting with each other in a way or being different, but this one just seemed to, the darkness of everything seemed to suit it. And The Appointees is different in a lot of ways. I mean the whole tone of that record to me was dark just because the time felt dark, but then there's these kind of playful country songs and stuff that are happening. But there was something about this lyric and that music where they seemed to be a good fit for each other. And I was fine with keeping everything a little kind of vague. I mean, to me, when I listen to the lyric, there are some specifics that maybe have a little bit of Trump in them, to be honest. But I still wanted to keep it a little vague. It was a very heavy song for me, and when it was released, that time felt heavy, and it was a dark time, and it feels like we're still in it. And so,
very interesting rhythm and chords. Clearly, your chord vocabulary or your adventurousness about this has grown over time, but it seems like you always were interested in. Am I right that there was no sort of, a lot of folks I talked to, there was a starting fascination with 50s rock, or that there's some point of simplicity with which they grew out to. I sort of started pretentious. I was in choir and in orchestra, and so even when I didn't understand anything, I'm trying to write chords that I don't know what they are. What is your arc in terms of that development?
I mean, that's kind of it. I've always liked more complex chords. I want to say that maybe listening to Todd Rundgren a lot in high school might have been a big one for me, because he does a lot of 5 chords over 1. And then, of course, at some point, maybe you learn the 4 chord over 5 that ends a phrase, and that's a big one. And actually, As for the Future is an example. I mean, Brazilian music is just all these great complex chords that I love. And so in a way, that was part of my need to I have to make this music because this is a place where you can put these chords in, and it feels very natural and it's a good fit for the music. But See the Devil is kind of maybe if anything, it has a bit of that sort of Todd Rundgren vibe. A song like Don't You Ever Learn is one that kind of has a similar feel to this. And there's another similarity, which I was thinking about. Billy Mackenzie from The Associates. He made a solo record towards the very end of his life. It's a very kind of like dark piano record. There's a song on that I can't remember off the top of my head, but this song kind of was in the vein of thinking about Justin Vivian Bond, who has a lower singing voice than Billy Mackenzie did, but the two of them had kind of like a similar sound in terms of how they sang.
Yeah, and I guess the fact that you completely pause a couple times, is there a counter through that? Or is it really just, it stopped and then you start again, and then the people who are playing along with this have to, you're not there to cue them. Your piano you is not there to cue them.
It's a good question. I probably recorded this to a click, and the click exists, and I just pause, and then when it felt right, start it again. But then again, maybe not, because the very end of that song is at a slower tempo. So at that point, the click might be out. Like there might have been like a click for like, the first two verses. And then when we hit that one pause, maybe it's out after that, but I don't remember.
And I guess technology has progressed such that I had a problem for a long time where, I would have a metronome in my headphones and it would inevitably bleed on whatever I'm recording. But I guess if you're playing direct inject fake piano or something, then you can avoid that.
It's still, that still happens. You just have to remember it and not be like, oh, damn, later when there's that bleed that inevitably happens. So
anything else about the use of vibes here? That particular approach to percussion that we're going to have, it almost seems like a very light timpani sort of sound, or fake timpani. How much were you directing that versus, what Conrad, I guess, chose to do?
He would have added the vibes later. So that's something he would have, that actually would have been an overdub later on. But when we did the session, Annie would have played bass. Johnny is an amazing pedal steel player, but also, this was the moment where it was like, he did stuff where it really didn't sound like a pedal steel at all. Like the rest of the Legislation record is kind of like, I don't know, it's the closest I'm going to get ever probably to making a country-ish folk record. And the pedal steel playing on that is a little bit more traditional. But the idea here was like, he should just put it through all sorts of effects and see where it goes. Stephanie, I believe, played maybe like a Juno synth on this song when we did it. So I think that's what she played. And Conrad did kind of like atmospheric kind of mallets on toms for that song. It's probably what he was playing as I remember it. The other thing is the vocals on this song. When we did overdubs on vocals, Stephanie and Annie sang all the background vocals, and they're so great. They're just wonderful. And the first two songs on the EP, here are the parts to sing on this. And then on one song, I said, Stephanie, why don't you arrange a vocal part for this? Annie, why don't you arrange a vocal part for this one? And then for See the Devil, we did it in the studio in real time. Like basically they were just singing stuff and I was just kind of sitting there while they worked their magic, basically. That was done in what I guess would be considered a live overdubbing session. Okay, which took maybe about an hour, maybe an hour and a half.
Let me insert at 4:04.
Devil's autograph, and let them have a guided tour of the devil's universe, and let their expectations go.
You've already got some pretty weird chords to try to be over that you'd have to be sort of a Manhattan Transfer level of skill or whatever to actually match those. But you're stacking weirdness on weirdness. I actually wrote terrible chords next to that because it's
Escape from Manhattan Transfer. Yeah.
All right. So Drunk at the Prom, Nova Social from your last full album, For Any Inconvenience, 2011. I think it says featuring the Bandana Splits. I don't know what
the Bandana Splits.
Who are they and what are they playing? What is
So the Bandana Splits they all live in different places now. But they were a trio. It was Lauren Balthrop, Annie Nero, who was in the Legislation, and Dawn Landis. When they were all living in Brooklyn, they had this it was like a kind of girl group. So the girl group that did Mr. Sandman, that kind of, they were kind of in that vein. We're three girls singing in harmonies and doing all this stuff. And they did like some EPs and they had like they did some holiday shows and stuff, but they're all amazing musicians and singers and stuff. And so I thought it'd be really cool to have them basically be the backing singers on this. So they're the three that come in during that final chorus. I mean, the structure of this song is like verse 1 A, verse B, verse 1B, chorus, verse 2, and then second chorus. And so they come in at the second chorus.
You couldn't see your shadow as you fell out of the limo. Your heart was full of arrows. Your body was a brand new bow. Your date had just moved on. You were as hopeless as your favorite song. You glared at the camera and smiled at a night going wrong. You were drunk at the prom and you missed the last dance, 'cause you were out back blowing your second chance. You were drunk at the prom and the chaperone said the valedictorian might end up dead. And the child remained a child for another lonely school year. Till there was nothing left to learn and nothing left to fear. You were drunk at the prom and you missed the last dance, 'cause you were out back blowing your second chance.
How will you face yourself
You were drunk at the prom and the chaperone said the valedictorian might end up dead. You were drunk at the prom and you missed the last dance, 'cause you were out back blowing your second chance.
How will you face yourself
You were drunk at the prom and the chaperone said the valedictorian might end up dead, 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 end up dead.
How will you face yourself How will you face yourself
So similarly, we eventually get a slow piano line, but we start out with this. Tell about your voyage to becoming an electronic musician here, and specifically this very startling, weird sample that you're starting with is, that's providing one of the main things before the kick and the snare come in.
Tom Soriano and I were just really into electronic music and disco and stuff. And we kind of, similarly to As for the Future, where it was like, who am I to be, writing these songs? it took us a number of years of writing stuff in that style and figuring out what made sense for us to do it, because we're like, no, we're like guitar rock dudes. Like what business do we have? We were weird guitar rock dudes, and like, record like the Jefferson Fracture definitely, I think, attests to that. But in order to sort of make this jump into this music, we thought of like what we wanted to sound like. To me, one of the amazing things about this group was that I was no longer the sole songwriter. Tom lives in New Jersey. I live in Brooklyn. And we would, work on stuff on our own. And then the two of us would get together, most likely at my place in Brooklyn. And we just send files back and forth between our two laptops. I was on a Mac. He's on a PC. I worked in Logic. He worked in like Acid or something. But he would come up with stuff on his own. There was a period in like the mid 2000s where there was that, it still exists, but NASO Almo, National Solo Album Month, where you write and record an album in a single month. The month is November. And so I did a couple of those, maybe when Nova Social was still in kind of like its rock iteration. And Tom had did one or two, and he did one where in the vein of a commercial album by The Residents, where every song is exactly a minute long. He did one like that. And Tom's thing is basically like, he doesn't write lyrics, at least he didn't then. And so he would just write instrumentals, and he would use samples and electronic sounds and stuff. And so he had the basis for what could be songs. And so a handful of my favorite songs on the Nova Social record, For Any Inconvenience, were written by him. The music was written by him. So the song The Star and the song The Hard Part, Martin is another one. He wrote the music to those. And I basically like had these lyrics and, sort of put them on top. And Drunk at the Prom was entirely his. So he had these electronic kick, snare, beat, and he had that piano progression. And, I don't know if you had asked Tom what it was, he might not have said, oh, well, it's a A major 9, and then it's an E major 7 after that. I'm not sure that's sort of the way his brain thinks in terms of writing, but the chord progression is beautiful. And I had this lyric and I thought it would be great. And it was like, it doesn't need any more. It's just a beautiful progression. We can just build on it, and we can take things away, and we can add strings and vocals and so forth.
Child remained a child for another lonely school year.
So just that we have this moving, is that an electric guitar line, or is that another synth that do 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 do?
It would be Tom's electric
guitar. Okay, so that's just, I got the feeling, at least on the final EP where you had the laptop rock song. So you're sort of, as if there's something to at least remark about, not necessarily apologize about, but, for being a guitar rock person to really, am I really just doing this on, I just interviewed Ja Wobble, and he like did a whole record on a bus, that because he's like using his iPad, and there seems, he felt the need to go back and overdub his actual bass, at least, to have his signature thing on it. But there does seem to be something like, at least there's been a lot of suspicion in the early 80s when this started becoming a thing of the guitar rock guys. I don't know, is it actually sequenced, or is it, maybe there's a difference between the way you and Tom do it, but like, are you creating it in a different way? Like I actually have, behind me right now is a Casio CZ5000 that was from my first band in 1987. And that was programming stuff in. So it was all very, very deliberate. Whereas now there's not a lot of difference between, you might as well just play it with your fingers, even if you quantize it afterwards, because there's no advantage to step programming,
right? To
my knowledge.
Part of that has to do if we work together again with like a degree of unknowing. Like I don't really know how Tom got a lot of those sounds, like no idea. And I didn't ask for the most part. I was just like, well, it sounds cool. There it is. Basically he gave them to me as WAV files, and I just put them in, and I'm like, that's what it is, and like, I know how I work, and maybe he would see some of what I did as well. And especially working in Logic, things are much more transparent in terms of like, it's this plugin, and it takes a long time for me to convert the MIDI file to an actual audio file. So you can see what the plugin is and all this stuff. But for the most part, I don't really know what some of that is.
So he's not giving you MIDI files. He's just giving you, it's a WAV file, whether it's a synth or whether it's the guitar. So as far as you're concerned, it's not like we're working together in MIDI and then we're going to put the analog stuff on top. It's just all.
Well, there is that too. But it's basically like, this song would be an example of like, we have drums, we have this kind of bass line, we have these kind of synthy percussion things. There's the piano part that he did. And we actually got our then piano player, Dan Lipton, to record a piano part of that, because then he could kind of like go off at the end and do more kind of like cocktail
Sure.
kind of piano stuff, which he does. And so there's that. And then Tom added electric guitars later. And we added vocals there. But there's kind of like when the song started, Tom already had a bunch of the elements kind of ready to go. Tom took, I think, an Eric Satie piano piece, and he just kind of pitch shifted and did all this weird stuff with it. And that's what you're hearing.
Oh, okay. So a form of sample. All right. And then I guess the last thing is just you're adding actual strings, right? At the last, as sort of the last step. Any thought about how you're deciding to end the song, right? That you've got some sort of, it could just keep repeating with the female vocals coming in and more of these atmospheric elements, and you got the strings. And tell me about the finishing touches.
At this point, the band was playing live.
Mm-hmm.
And so the version of the band that played live was I sang, played a little bit of synthesizer. Tom played guitar. Dan usually played keyboards and some synth and piano, keyboard, synth stuff. Our singer was this guy, Xavier Smith, who I've worked with for many years since then. He was the sort of my co-vocalist in the group.
And he does Aaron Neville sort of. I'll link folks to the live version of this because I did watch that today. And he takes over the female part and then just, does Aaron Neville type floaty stuff to help wrap up.
Yeah, basically. Like, Xavier's one of those people you can say like, hey, improvise on this and he'll do it. So it was the four of us, and then we had a string trio. And so at this time, I had been, in the mid 2000s, I'd been seeing a lot of kind of shows with live strings. So I saw like the artist Kelly Poehler. I saw Gorillaz had a string section when I saw them. And I had this idea of like, we'll do a string trio. When we recorded with the producer Godfrey Diamond, who made a bunch of disco records in the late 70s, he said, it's cello and violin. It's not viola and violin. So I had to change that up. It wasn't viola. And so, but that was the idea, is like 2 violins, cello. And so all the parts, every song we were playing live at that time had strings on it. I didn't want any songs where like the string players just sit there and do nothing on stage. I wanted there to be parts for everyone. And so that was what we did. And so I think we'd probably already started playing Drunk at the Prom live when we recorded it. So we had the string part that comes in at the end. And to me, this is a very emotional song for me. Like even thinking about it, it still makes me emotional thinking about it. And so I kind of wanted to keep that emotion sort of like fading off into the distance as the song fades out, rather than like a hard stop or anything.
Yeah. So sort of accommodation. I mean, you've got your arrangements that you do for other people, and, let's chart everything out so we can get the professional players to come in and do this, versus what you were talking about at the beginning of See the Devil, of just getting talented people that can atmospherically work around each other and make it sort of sound like, but then, you've got your synthesized stuff, which is by necessity not going to be very improvisational. I've talked to some electronic musicians who sort of figure out their sounds so that they can then jam with the sounds. But it sounds, for normal people who did not, have not been doing this for 30 years, that particular kind of music, it's a very constructed sort of, so we've got, it seems like bits of all of those in this song that you get to show full featured.
The thing about Nova Social at the time, and I want to say this, the impetus in a way to make this music was doing karaoke. Like for me, like karaoke, when I first did it in like the mid 90s, was so much fun. I'm singing like Michael Jackson's Rock With You, and it's like the most fun. And I'm like, I want to do this all the time. And I would love to write songs where I can have that feeling when I'm performing them. And I think that's what this version of Nova Social was like, knowing that when we play live, there's going to be a karaoke element to it. Like we're going to basically be playing to backing tracks, but how do we de-karaokeize it as much as possible? That was what that band was. And when we kind of figured out this idea of like 7 people, 3 string players and 4 others, that is enough to kind of, make it feel like we're not just doing karaoke. It's not just like us
2 guys on stage, 1 guitar, 1 singing, and then
we've all seen it. It's sad, but sometimes it just has to be done because that's what makes sense.
Were you playing anything from the older records? Were you reinterpreting, reworking older songs to put them in this new format, or you just said it doesn't matter? We don't have fans that are going to demand that, or whatever. It's the current lineup in the current project, and that's what this is right now.
I want to say, I'm trying to remember if we did any songs. We might have done there was an old piano song called Tree Trunk that we might have done that made sort of sense. But most of the stuff we just started fresh with the Nova Social EP that came out in 2008. And we're like, this is what we're going to do right now. And I don't think anyone will care too much.
I guess when I was characterizing this 3 different ways of putting music together that might have gone into this, for you is the way that you construct a string arrangement and then the way you might construct a pile of synths. Are those actually the same? Like, are you demoing the string parts by programming them in the way that you would do if you were just going to leave them as keyboards? Like, is there actually that different apart from producing a written score to hand to somebody?
It's similar. I don't know if it's the same. With strings, when I at least record like a string part, you have to sort of know how it's going to sound with real strings. And the plugins that you can use are kind of close enough to approximate it where you could play it for someone and not be embarrassed. Like, oh, by the way, we're going to have real strings. You can kind of be like, this is what it sounds like. And people will get the idea. But playing a synth part, it's like, this is it. Maybe Daniel or someone can mix it and like tweak it out a little more. But it's basically like, this is what it's going to sound like. So it has to sound good. Had
you done composition school? Was this all on the job training, this arranging skill that you got around to? Like, knowing what range to write. I mean, you can get your orchestration book down, but until you actually do it and a few times and get it wrong, and the player tells you like, don't make me play that high up the neck, like, or whatever.
Right. It's learning on the job. In like 1999, I would have gotten my first laptop and I would have gotten a version of Logic for that. And so through that, I learned recording and I learned MIDI. I mean, like I used MIDI in when I was in junior high when I had like 2 synths and you control one synth with the other, which is sort of fun. I have like memories of like playing a version of Genesis's Tonight, like in like my bedroom or something using 2 synths. And oh my God, that's fun, But I didn't use MIDI for any like kind of what I could say, quote unquote, real purposes until I started recording in Logic. And then it kind of all made sense, like how you can use MIDI in these proper ways. And somewhere around that time was when, maybe not long after, Chris Mills and I made the wall-to-wall sessions. And I had done some string arrangements and I did some horn arrangements for him. And then he said, we should make a record of all string live, do it live, all strings and horns and stuff. And so I would have started doing some of it. I probably did my first arrangements by hand. Mm-hmm. And when I was making the wall-to-wall sessions or doing the arrangements, I would have done it in Logic and I would have done it all in MIDI. That would have been how I sort of learned how to do that. And then not long after, John Langford and I wrote Only the River, and I wrote a full orchestral arrangement for that. And so it's just like learning stuff like that by doing it, but having enough theory and training to not be starting from nowhere.
Well, sounds like you've taken advantages of the opportunities that were presented to you, to rise to the level of competence required.
I hope so.
We're going to say goodbye and then play one more song from the new album, As for the Future, Encyclopedia of Songs. So this one is listed as co-written with you and Brian, the drummer. Do you want to say a few words about it before we go? Why this one?
Because it's a collaboration, I think a lot of things I've done really kind of stress the importance of collaboration and how that became a major part of my life at least 10, maybe 15 years ago, and really changed everything for the better in a really amazing way. So this is an example of a song where Brian basically just put a samba beat up on Facebook. He was like, he will do this from time to time. He does it on Instagram. He'll just like play a beat and he'll put it out there. And so he put this samba beat up on Facebook and I kind of recorded it into my laptop and then recorded a chord progression over it, a couple chord progressions, the verse and the bridge. And then several months later, found a lyric that to me really kind of fit with the song. That was how it came about.
All right. Well, thanks so much for doing this. It was a pleasure listening to your sort of nonlinear catalog here.
And thanks for bearing with it. It's a lot. So,
all right, here it is. Encyclopedia of Songs.
There's a song down in the ocean, a song high in the sky, a song deep in a canyon that can swim and fly. And I will travel my whole life to find it, or I will wait here my whole life until it comes to me. There's a song in every traffic jam, in every subway car, a song in a crowded theater or in the emptiest bar. And I will comes to me. There's a song in every movie screen, a song in every laptop screen, a song in every iPhone screen, a song in every screen. And I will stay in every night to find it, or I will go out every night until it comes to me. A song written in solitude, a song composed with friends, a song less than a minute long, a song that never ends. There's a song in every instrument, a song in every voice, a song in every insistence and misbegotten choice. And I will live my life trying to find it, or I will wait here all my life until it comes to me. Until it comes to me. Until it comes to me.
Thanks so much to David, a multi-talented, super sharp guy, a fully original singer-songwriter who yet has all these other talents that just make him a great guy to have around, whatever your project may be. Check out more of his material at davidnagler.com, or you could track the latest doings at facebook.com/asforthefuture. I'll also refer folks to Carl Sandburg Chicago Poems.com for information about that interesting project. David really knows how to put on a stage show. If you look at the blog post for this episode at nakedlyexaminedmusic.com, I will have linked to several of these live experiences with a bunch of people standing around. You can see him conducting a choir for John Langford, who is a guest I've had on the show. I also want to refer folks to my Wesley Stace interview, where the first song we talk about is one that David wrote the music for. It's interesting that the two of them sort of had a different take on how they wrote together. And if you never thought you might be spinning a Brazilian bossa nova kind of song, I think As for the Future is a great way into that kind of music that is both comedic, lighthearted, yet obviously takes that form of music as seriously good music and not just a joke for a TV show or whatnot. And I think irony and humor are legitimate ways of getting into musics that you might not have considered part of your wheelhouse. The jokey Rolling Stones country songs made me eventually an actual country fan. You can hear more about getting into country through a love of punk music in my next interview, which is with Amy Rigby. And I think the openness, to the extent that I have any, for heavy metal is also something that was facilitated by humor. And just yesterday, as I'm about to release this episode, I talked to Dale Crover of the Melvins, which is a band sludge metal, not a genre that I've spent a lot of time with, but they have a really great sense of humor. And Dale is a very good singer-songwriter, guitar player in his own right. So please make sure you're subscribed directly to the Nakedly Examined Music podcast via nakedlyexaminedmusic.com, or just look up the show on Apple Music or whatnot. I hope if you're on Apple Music, you will leave a nice rating and review. And if you're up to it, hit that little subscribe button, which will start charging you a small monthly fee to give you an ad-free version of this experience. Alternately, patreon.com/nakedlyexaminedmusic also gets you that ad-free feed, plus links to my notes documents, which have the detailed structures, lyrics, arrangement details for all the songs that I cover. Also, Spotify users, I want to just let you know that I have a Spotify playlist of all the songs, even for upcoming episodes. So go follow that list and you can just see what the songs you should be prepped on to maximally enjoy this podcast. Thank you so much for spending time with us here. For any way you might have supported the show in the past, please check out my other many shows. Those are Close Reads, Philosophy with Mark and Wes, and The Partially Examined Life, and Pretty Much Pop, a culture podcast, and Philosophy versus Improv, which I should say has a live show if you live in the Chicago area and you happen to be listening to this quickly enough so that you can come see me on Wednesday, August 21st at the IO Theater, 6 to 7 p.m. We're going to be doing a live taping of that show there. Hope you're doing well. Keep it creative. Staying healthy. Keep on musicking. Until next time, this is Mark Linsenmeyer signing off.
And the children